I've decided to move forward with my life, without you in it. Those words came out of Nigel's mouth like poison, right there in the middle of Luca's, that fancy Italian restaurant in Manhattan where we gathered to celebrate our son David's graduation from Columbia University. My husband of 25 years stood there with his wine glass raised, his announcement replacing what was supposed to be a toast to our boy's achievements. The entire restaurant went silent. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died. About 60 pairs of eyes locked on us, waiting to see what would happen next. Waiting for the tears, the screaming, the drama they all expected from a blindsided wife. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I smiled. Congratulations on your honesty, Nigel. My name is Martha Davis. I'm 45 years old, and my knotted curls fall just past my shoulders, jet black except for that white streak in the front that came in when I turned 40. People say it makes me look distinguished. Right now, it made me feel powerful. For 25 years, I'd been the perfect wife. I worked double shifts as a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital while Nigel finished his residency. I took out loans in my name to help him open his private practice. I raised our brilliant son David, who sat beside me now in his cap and gown, his face frozen in absolute horror. From the corner of my eye, I could see Dr. Nicole Chin, Nigel's colleague at the hospital, 20 years younger than me, sitting at a back table with people I'd called friends for decades. The same friends who apparently knew about this whole situation but never thought to warn me. The same Nicole who I'd mentored when she first started at Mount Sinai, who'd cried on my shoulder about her own relationship problems. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to realize they were planning your destruction the whole time? If you have, you know exactly what I felt in that moment. With steady hands, I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I placed it gently next to Nigel's plate. "What's this?" he asked, and I could see his confidence starting to crack. "Something for your reading pleasure," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. I turned to David, whose eyes were filled with tears. I kissed his forehead. "Baby, I am so incredibly proud of you. This day is still about your achievement, you hear me? Nothing changes that." Then I stood up, smoothed down my navy dress, and addressed our stunned guests. "Please, everyone, enjoy your meal. I hope you all have a blessed evening." With that, I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, feeling every single pair of eyes following me. The heavy door swung shut behind me, cutting off the shocked whispers that were just beginning. Outside, the New York summer heat hit me like a wall, but honestly, I welcomed it. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe freely. Behind me, I heard the restaurant door slam open, followed by Nigel's voice, no longer confident, but high-pitched and panicked. "Martha, Martha, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I kept walking toward the parking garage, allowing myself a small smile. That envelope contained the beginning of something he never saw coming, something I'd been carefully planning for 6 months. See, I've always been the practical one in our marriage. While Nigel dreamed big and took risks, I maintained the stability our family needed. When he wanted to open his private practice but the banks wouldn't approve, him, who co-signed that loan. Me. When he wanted to expand to a second location, who took out a second mortgage on our house? Me. When he decided he needed that expensive office in Upper Manhattan to attract wealthy patients, who worked night shifts for 6 months straight to cover our bills. Me. My own dreams of maybe opening a small clinic in our neighborhood, serving people who looked like us, who couldn't afford fancy doctors? Those dreams went into a box labeled someday. 6 months ago, I noticed something odd. Small transfers from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. Now, I'd been managing our household finances for 25 years. I knew every penny that came in and went out. These transfers stood out like a sore thumb. I could have confronted Nigel right then, but something told me to wait. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the way he'd been acting lately, distant, always on his phone, coming home later and later from the hospital. Instead, I started investigating quietly. And girl, what I found made me sick to my stomach. Nigel had been moving money to a secret account for over a year. He'd also been taking Nicole to expensive restaurants, buying her jewelry. Jewelry he told me we couldn't afford for our own anniversary, and he'd even put a down payment on a condo in Brooklyn, all while telling me we needed to cut back on expenses. Then I found the text messages. He'd left his phone unlocked one morning after a night shift, and there it was. Messages about their new beginning. Messages about how he was finally going to be free. Messages planning this exact moment, the public announcement at David's graduation. What would you do if you found messages like that? Would you confront him immediately, or would you play it smart? I played it smart. See, what Nigel forgot, or maybe never fully understood, was that I wasn't just some nurse who worked under him at the hospital. I'd been managing our money for 25 years. I knew where every asset was. I knew which accounts were in whose name. And most importantly, I remembered something crucial about our house. When we bought our home in Harlem 20 years ago, Nigel's credit was terrible from med school debt. The mortgage, the deed, everything, it was all in my name only. He'd promised we'd refinance and add his name later, but I'd quietly never gotten around to it. That house, worth over $1 million now in this market, was legally mine, and mine alone. While Nigel was plotting his escape with Nicole, I was building my case. I opened a secret savings account at a different bank. Every time I worked an extra shift, I deposited that money there. Every bonus, every holiday pay, straight into my private account. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of text messages, records of money transfers, photos of receipts from the restaurants and jewelry stores. I met with a lawyer, a sister from my church named Patricia, who specialized in divorces. She looked over everything and smiled. Martha, honey, you've got him. That house alone changes everything. But I wanted to time it perfectly. I knew Nigel would wait until after David's graduation. He wouldn't want to ruin his image as a good father. What he didn't know was that I'd already filed the divorce papers 3 days ago, and they were sitting in the court system, ready to be served. The envelope I handed him at the restaurant? Those were his copies. I didn't go back to the restaurant. Instead, I drove to our home in Harlem, that beautiful brownstone we'd purchased 20 years ago. The home Nigel had already promised to Nicole based on text messages he didn't know I'd seen. I parked on the street and walked up those familiar steps, entering what had been our shared space for 2 decades. Everything looked the same. Family photos on the walls, David's childhood drawings framed in the hallway, the antique furniture I'd inherited from my grandmother. But everything had changed. I went upstairs to our bedroom and opened Nigel's closet. His suitcases were already packed and hidden in the back, ready for his planned departure tomorrow. I had to laugh at his predictability. Always organized about the wrong things. My phone started buzzing like crazy with messages from guests at the restaurant, from David, even from Nigel's mother who'd flown in from Atlanta for the graduation. I responded only to my son. Baby, I'm okay. This is not your burden to carry. Enjoy your graduation day. We'll talk tonight. I love you more than anything. I'd protected David from the truth for months, not wanting to mess up his final semester. He'd be upset I didn't tell him, but he'd understand eventually. My boy had my brains and his father's charm, a powerful combination that helped him graduate summa cum laude. 3 hours later, I heard Nigel's car pull up. The front door slammed open so hard I thought it might break. Martha, he shouted, his voice echoing through the brownstone. Where are you? I was sitting in the living room, calmly looking through documents on my tablet. I closed it as he stormed in, his face red with anger, that envelope crushed in his hand. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, waving the papers. You filed for divorce? Today of all days. I thought it aligned perfectly with your plans, I replied calmly. You wanted to start fresh. I'm just helping you along. You had no right to. I had every right, I interrupted. my voice steady. Just like you had every right to choose Nicole. We all make choices, Nigel. Now we live with them. The house is in both our names, he said, suddenly looking smug. Any lawyer will tell you it's marital property. You'll have to sell it and split everything. I allowed myself a small smile. Actually, it's not. The deed is in my name only. Your name was never added. Because your credit wouldn't allow it, remember? My lawyer checked. That house is mine. The color drained from his face as reality hit him. The house he'd been planning to use as leverage, maybe even promise to Nicole, wasn't his to promise. You're lying, he said, but his voice had lost its strength. Check the deed yourself. It's in the lockbox. Has been for 20 years. Nigel collapsed onto the couch like someone had cut his strings. His grand gesture at the restaurant had just become the most expensive announcement of his life. You can't do this to me, he said quietly. We built this life together. And you chose to tear it down, I replied. Not in the way you planned, but yes, it's coming down. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then looked away. Nicole, no doubt, wondering where he was and why he wasn't following their perfect plan. You've always been smart, Martha, he said, trying a different approach. But this is cold. What about our history? 25 years together means nothing. I studied this man I'd loved for a quarter century. The man who'd held my hand when I miscarried twice before. We had David. The man who used to bring me coffee during my double shifts. When had he changed? Or had he always been capable of this, and I'd been too busy supporting him to notice? Our history meant everything to me, I answered honestly. That's exactly why your betrayal cuts so deep. If someone you loved for 25 years betrayed you like this, could you ever forgive them? Could you even want to? His expression softened for a moment, like he saw an opening. Then maybe we can work through this. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Martha. This wasn't a mistake, Nigel. This was a calculated plan over more than a year. You systematically moved our money. You looked at property with her. You planned to publicly humiliate me in front of everyone we know. You're exaggerating. Am I? I picked up my phone, opened a recording app, and hit play. Nigel's voice came through the speaker. After the graduation, I'll tell her it's over. A public setting is better. She won't make a scene in front of David and everyone else. Then Nicole's voice. And she doesn't know about the money you've been saving? Nigel again. Nothing. Martha trusts me completely. Always has. That's her weakness. The blood drained from his face completely. You recorded us? That's illegal. Not in New York when one party consents, I responded. And not when it's in your own home. I didn't record anything private. Just conversations about your plans to deceive me. Nigel stood suddenly, agitated. I need to make some calls. I need to talk to my lawyer. You do that, I said. I'll be staying at my sister's tonight. You have until tomorrow evening to remove your personal belongings from this house. After that, the locks get changed. As I headed toward the door with my overnight bag, Nigel called after me, desperation creeping into his voice. What about David? Have you thought about how this affects him? I stopped and turned around slowly, feeling anger finally break through my calm exterior. Don't you dare use our son as a shield, Nigel. You certainly weren't thinking about David when you were planning your new life with Nicole. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it and actually groaned out loud. Problem? I asked. Nicole is at the apartment already. She moved her things in. I couldn't help but smile. The apartment you signed a lease for? The one in Brooklyn? He nodded, looking confused about where I was going with this. You might want to check with the leasing office. That application was flagged because your credit score is still terrible. They called our house phone my house phone to verify employment and income. I told them you no longer lived at this address and I couldn't verify any information. I walked out the door, leaving Nigel to face the consequences of his choices. His perfectly planned new life was falling apart faster than he could process, and honestly, He deserved every bit of it. What would you have done in my position? Would you have been this prepared, or would you have fallen apart? Let me know, because this story is far from over. My sister Diane lived in a cozy apartment in Brooklyn, not far from where she taught middle school English. When I pulled up, she was already waiting on the steps, and the moment she saw me, she ran over and wrapped me in the tightest hug. "I just got off the phone with David," she said, pulling me inside. "Girl, are you okay?" "I'm better than I thought I'd be," I admitted, following her into the kitchen where she already had a bottle of wine open and 2 glasses waiting. "I never thought Nigel would be so bold," Diane said, pouring generously. "Making that announcement at the restaurant, in front of everybody. Has he lost his mind?" "It was supposed to humiliate me," I explained, accepting the glass. "A public rejection, so I couldn't fight back. Without looking unstable in front of David and all our friends." Diane's face hardened. "Your husband always did have a flair for the dramatic. But this is beyond anything I expected from him." We settled into her living room, surrounded by bookshelves and plants. Diane had never married, choosing instead to focus on her career and her students. Over the years, I'd sometimes envied her independence, her freedom to just be herself without molding into what someone else needed. "What was in that envelope that made him so upset?" she asked, leaning forward. I explained everything. The divorce filing, the evidence of his financial deception, the recordings of his conversations with Nicole, and most importantly, the house deed that proved I owned our home outright. "The house is in your name only?" Diane's eyes went wide. "Martha, that's brilliant. How did you manage that?" "His credit was terrible when we bought it. Still is, apparently. I was supposed to refinance and add his name, but I just never did. Kept meaning to, but life got busy, you know? Now I'm thanking God for that." Procrastination. Diane laughed, but it was bitter. The irony is beautiful. He was so sure he had everything figured out. My phone rang. "David." I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom," he said immediately, his voice strained. "I'm coming over to Aunt Diane's." "Honey, you don't have to." "I'm already in an Uber," he interrupted. "Dad is at the restaurant telling everyone you've been planning this for months out of spite. He's saying horrible things, Mom." "Horrible." Of course he was. Nigel always rewrote history to make himself the victim. It was almost predictable at this point. "Let him talk," I said. "The truth has a way of coming out eventually." 20 minutes later, David arrived, still in his graduation suit but with his tie loosened and his eyes red from crying. He fell into my arms like he used to when he was little and had a bad dream. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I didn't want to ruin your final semester," I explained, holding him tight. "You worked so hard for this day. Baby, you earned it." He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "Well, Dad took care of ruining it anyway." We moved to Diane's living room where David finally heard the whole story, how I discovered the affair, the financial deception, the secret apartment, all of it. His face went through so many emotions I couldn't keep track. "I knew something was off with Dad," David admitted. "He's been different lately. Always on his phone, distant. During our calls, making excuses not to meet up. But I never imagined this. None of us want to see the worst in people we love," Diane said gently, rubbing his shoulder. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, my lawyer. The emergency motion had been approved. The joint bank account was frozen pending divorce proceedings. Nigel now had limited access, enough for basic living expenses, but not enough to follow through on that condo he'd been planning with Nicole. I showed the message to Diane and David. "Good," David said firmly. "He deserves it." My son's loyalty warmed my heart, but I needed him to understand something important. He's still your father, David. Your relationship with him is separate from what's happening between us. David shook his head hard. "Maybe someday, Mom. But right now, I can't even look at him." He hugged me this morning and told me how proud he was, all while planning to blow up our family hours later. How am I supposed to forgive that? The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Diane went to answer it, and I heard her voice rise in surprise. She came back looking troubled. "It's Nigel," she said quietly. "And Nicole is with him." I steeled myself as Diane led them into the living room. Nicole looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, her eyes darting around nervously. She was 25 years old, beautiful in that effortless way young people are, with long straight hair and perfect skin. She'd always been confident at the hospital, but right now she looked like she wanted to disappear. Nigel, by contrast, looked angry. His earlier panic had hardened into rage. "Martha, you need to stop this nonsense," he demanded. "Unfreeze the accounts. We can discuss this like adults." David stood up, placing himself slightly in front of me. "Maybe you should have tried acting like an adult before you announced your affair in front of everyone at my graduation." David, Nigel's eyes widened like he was just now noticing our son. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" David echoed, his voice rising. "You destroyed our family on my graduation day, and it doesn't concern me." Nicole touched Nigel's arm gently. "Maybe we should leave." He shook her off. "No. I'm not leaving until Martha agrees to be reasonable about this." Diane folded her arms. "Your wife seems to be the only reasonable person here. You're the one who created this disaster, Nigel." I remained seated, watching the scene unfold. For years, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over every conflict, who kept everyone happy. That role had been exhausting, and I'd finally set it down. It felt lighter. Without it, "The accounts stay frozen until the preliminary hearing," I said calmly. "That's in 3 days. The judge will determine what happens from there." 3 days? Nigel sputtered. "What am I supposed to do for 3 days?" "You have your personal account," I reminded him. "The one you've been putting money into for the past year. That should be more than sufficient." Nicole's head whipped toward Nigel. "You have a separate account? With how much in it?" Oh, this was interesting. Apparently Nigel hadn't been completely honest with Nicole either. What a surprise. Nigel ignored her question. "This is vindictive, Martha. This isn't like you." "Perhaps you never really knew me," I replied. "Just like I apparently never really knew you." David turned to Nicole, and his voice was ice cold. "Did you know he was going to announce it like that? At my graduation?" Nicole had the decency to look ashamed. I thought he was going to tell your mother privately." The restaurant announcement was unexpected for me, too. Nigel shot her a look of betrayal. Cracks were already forming in their united front, and I could see it spreading. "I think you both should leave now," Diane said firmly. "You've upset everyone enough for one day." "David," Nigel tried, his voice desperate. "You understand that relationships change, don't you? Sometimes people grow apart. It doesn't mean—" "What I understand," David cut him off, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it, "is that you're a coward who couldn't even give Mom the respect of a private conversation. What I understand is that you were stealing from our family while I was working 2 part-time jobs to help with expenses because you said money was tight." Nigel went pale. "That's not how it was." "It's exactly how it was," David said. "Please leave, Dad. I can't look at you right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Nigel turned to go, Nicole trailing behind him looking miserable. At the door, he paused and looked back at me. "This isn't over, Martha. I'll fight you on every point." I met his gaze steadily. "You're welcome to try." After they left, David collapsed onto the couch next to me, tears streaming down his face. I've never talked to Dad like that before. I wrapped my arms around him. "Sometimes standing up for what's right is painful, baby. But that doesn't make it wrong." Diane brought us fresh glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed, but in my mind, I was already 3 steps ahead, planning what came next. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you loved, even when it hurt? Have you ever had to choose yourself over keeping the peace? If you have, you know it's not easy. But sometimes it's necessary. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning, 3 days away. I spent those days preparing, gathering every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence that showed Nigel's deception. Patricia, my lawyer, was thorough and brilliant. Martha, you've built an airtight case, she told me during one of our preparation sessions. Between the house, deed, the evidence of financial deception, and those recordings, he doesn't have much to stand on. What about the hospital? I asked. He threatened to have me fired. Patricia's eyes narrowed. On what grounds? You've been an exemplary employee for 20 years. Unless he wants to admit he's been having an affair with a colleague, which would put his own position at risk, he's got nothing. She was right. Nigel's position as head of cardiology meant he was held to certain professional standards. An affair with a subordinate because, yes, Nicole was technically under his supervision could cost him everything. But I wasn't taking chances. I'd already quietly reached out to the hospital's HR director, a woman named Sharon, who I'd worked with for years. I explained the situation, showed her the timeline of the affair, and asked what protections were available to me. Martha, Sharon had said, shaking her head in disgust, we take workplace relationships very seriously, especially when there's a power imbalance. You focus on your divorce. Let us handle Dr. Davis and Dr. Chen. The morning of the hearing arrived rainy and gray, fitting the mood perfectly. I dressed in a navy suit, pulled my hair back into a neat bun with that white streak visible, and met Patricia at the courthouse. Nigel arrived with his lawyer, a young man fresh out of law school who looked overwhelmed. Nigel's poor choice of representation was yet another consequence of his rushed planning. Most good divorce lawyers were already booked or wanted retainers he couldn't afford with the accounts frozen. The judge was an older black woman with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense. Judge Williams had a reputation for being fair but firm, and I felt a small surge of hope. I've reviewed the preliminary filings, Judge Williams said, looking over her glasses at both lawyers. This prenuptial agreement. Oh, wait. There is no prenuptial agreement. No, Your Honor, Patricia said. However, the family home is solely in Mrs. Davis's name, as evidenced by the deed filed in 2005. Judge Williams examined the deed carefully. And why was Mr. Davis's name never added? Nigel's lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Your Honor, we believe this was an oversight that should be corrected. An oversight that lasted 20 years? Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. That's quite the oversight. Your Honor, Patricia interjected, Mr. Davis's credit history prevented him from being added to the mortgage. Mrs. Davis has been the sole financial anchor for this family throughout their marriage. The judge shuffled through more papers. I also see evidence of undisclosed financial transfers. Mr. Davis did. You open accounts without your wife's knowledge. Nigel leaned forward to whisper urgently to his lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client believed he was entitled to manage marital funds as he saw fit. That's not how marital finances work, Counselor, Judge Williams said sharply. Especially when one party is being secretive about it. She flipped through more documents, her expression growing sterner. I'm seeing evidence of an affair with a workplace subordinate, systematic fund transfers, and what appears to be planning to leave the marriage while hiding assets. Nigel's face flushed red. This is ridiculous, he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Judge Williams fixed him with a stern look. Mr. Davis, I suggest you review your situation more carefully. This court does not look favorably on deception. She made her ruling quickly and decisively. The joint accounts would remain frozen except for documented necessary expenses. I would retain possession of the house during proceedings. Nigel would have access to his personal account only. The full hearing would be scheduled in 30 days after complete financial discovery. As we left the courtroom, Nigel caught up to me in the hallway. His lawyer had already scurried off, probably relieved to escape. Martha, please, Nigel said, his voice strained. We need to talk about this reasonably. 25 years together has to count for something. It counted for everything, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Until you decided it didn't. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in that courthouse hallway, finally starting to understand the weight of his choices. Would you have felt satisfied in that moment, or would you have felt sad? I felt both, if I'm being honest. News travels fast in our community. Within days, everyone knew about Nigel and Nicole, about the secret accounts, about the humiliating announcement at David's graduation. Friends started calling, some offering genuine support, others clearly fishing for gossip. I kept my responses brief and dignified. Nigel and I are separating. These things happen. I'm focusing on moving forward. Meanwhile, Nigel's carefully constructed image was crumbling. His reputation as a respected cardiologist, devoted family man, pillar of the community, all of it was tarnished beyond repair. The financial freeze meant he couldn't follow through on promises he'd made to Nicole. That condo in Brooklyn? The seller moved on to another buyer. The luxury vacation he'd apparently promised her? Cancelled. His grand vision of a fresh start was evaporating before his eyes. 2 weeks after the hearing, Diane called me with barely contained amusement in her voice. Have you heard the latest? What now? I asked, though I was smiling already. Nicole moved out. She's done with him. I wasn't entirely surprised, but the speed was impressive. Already? What happened? Apparently, she did some digging and found out Nigel's been exaggerating his financial situation this entire time. The thriving private practice? It's actually struggling. Those savings he talked about? Mostly fantasy. She told her friend Jennifer, the physical therapist, that she didn't sign up to be with a man who has more debt than assets. I couldn't help but laugh. He always was good at selling dreams. There's more, Diane continued. The hospital started an investigation into their relationship. Something about workplace ethics and power dynamics. Nicole's being transferred to a different department and Nigel's under review. That would be Sharon's doing. I'd have to send her a thank you card. What do you think Nicole expected would happen? Do you think she really believed Nigel was going to give her this perfect life, or was she just as deceived as I was? While Nigel's world fell apart, I was building something new. The financial security I'd quietly maintained, that secret savings account, the house in my name, the careful records I'd kept, gave me a freedom Nigel never anticipated. I'd been thinking about my next move for weeks now. My nursing career had been fulfilling, but I'd always felt there was something more I was meant to do. Something that would help people in a way that went beyond bandaging wounds and monitoring vitals. One evening, I was having coffee with Sharon from HR, thanking her for her support with the hospital investigation. Martha, she said thoughtfully, you should consider starting a home care business. You've got the experience, the connections, and honestly, you've got the organizational skills most people only dream about. The idea took root immediately. Home care services, helping elderly people stay in their homes with dignity, providing quality care that hospitals couldn't offer. It was perfect. I've been thinking about something like that, I admitted. But starting a business seems overwhelming. You managed a household, put a man through medical school, raised a son, and just outsmarted your husband. In divorce court, Sharon laughed. If anyone can do this, it's you. She was right. What was I so afraid of? That night, I started researching. New York had a growing elderly population and a shortage of quality home care services. The startup costs weren't as high as I'd feared, especially since I had that house as collateral if I needed it. I began making plans. Real plans, not the someday dreams I'd shelved for Nigel's ambitions. For the first time in 25 years, I was putting myself first, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Have you ever started something new after years of putting it off? Did it feel as scary and exciting as I felt right then? The final divorce hearing fell exactly 1 month later, on what would have been our 26th wedding anniversary. The universe has a sense of irony, doesn't it? Nigel arrived looking like he'd aged 10 years in 30 days. I'd heard through the grapevine that his practice was struggling without my behind-the-scenes financial management. Nicole was long gone, already dating some Wall Street guy she'd met at a hospital fundraiser. Most of our mutual friends had quietly distanced themselves from him once the truth came out about how he'd planned everything. Judge Williams reviewed the complete financial discovery with a stern expression. Patricia had done her job beautifully. Every hidden transfer, every secret account, every lie Nigel had told was documented in excruciating detail. Mr. Davis, Judge Williams said, looking at Nigel over her glasses, I have rarely seen such a clear pattern of financial deception in a marriage. You systematically moved funds, opened secret accounts, and planned to abandon your wife while hiding marital assets. Nigel's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, the affair with a workplace subordinate demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment that extends beyond this marriage. She made her ruling, and it was everything Patricia had hoped for. I kept the house, all of it, valued at $1.2 million in the current market. I received 65% of our joint investments and retirement accounts. Nigel kept his struggling medical practice, his personal account with whatever was left after paying his lawyer, and his personal possessions. The division was clean and final. The gavel came down, and just like that, 25 years of marriage was officially over. As we left the courtroom for the last time, Nigel approached me. His lawyer had already left, probably relieved to be done with this case. I made a terrible mistake, Martha, he said quietly, and for once, he sounded genuinely remorseful. Is there any chance we could? No, I interrupted, but my voice was gentle, not angry. That door is closed, Nigel. It closed the moment you chose to humiliate me in front of our son and everyone we knew. He nodded slowly. I understand. I hope you find happiness, Martha. You deserve it. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and I appreciated it, even if it changed nothing. I hope you find peace, I replied, and I meant it. David was waiting for me outside the courthouse. He'd taken the day off from his new job at a marketing firm to be there for me. When he saw me, he pulled me into a tight hug. It's over, he asked. It's over, I confirmed. Now the real work begins. He pulled back, confused. What real work? I smiled. Building something new. Over the next 3 months, I threw myself into creating Davis Home Care Services. I used part of my divorce settlement to secure a small office in Harlem, hired 2 other experienced nurses I'd worked with at Mount Sinai, and began reaching out to families who needed quality home care for their elderly loved ones. The work was immediately fulfilling in a way my hospital job never had been. At the hospital, I was always rushing, always stressed, always feeling like I couldn't give patients the time they deserved. But with my own business, I could set the standards. I could ensure every client received compassionate, thorough care. My first client was Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old woman with diabetes who lived alone in a walk-up in Washington Heights. Her daughter Sharon, yes, the same Sharon from hospital HR, had been desperately looking for reliable care. Martha, you're an answer to prayer, Sharon said when I took the case personally. Mom needs someone who actually cares, not just someone watching the clock. Mrs. Patterson reminded me of my own grandmother, proud, independent, but needing help she was reluctant to ask for. I visited her 3 times a week, managing her medications, checking her vitals, but also just sitting with her, listening to her stories about the Harlem Renaissance, about raising 6 children as a single mother. You've got a gift, child, Mrs. Patterson told me one afternoon. You make people feel seen. Her words stayed with me. For 25 years, I'd focused on making Nigel feel seen, feel supported, feel capable of achieving his dreams. Now I was using that same energy to help people who actually appreciated it. Word spread quickly through the community. One client became 5, then 10, then 20. I hired more nurses, all women who'd felt undervalued in traditional healthcare settings. Women who wanted to provide real care, not just process patients through a system. Within 6 months, Davis Home Care Services had 35 clients and a waiting list. I'd moved to a larger office space, hired an administrative assistant, and was looking into expanding to other New York boroughs. David came by the office regularly, sometimes just to have lunch, sometimes to help with marketing ideas from his own job experience. "Mom, you've built something amazing," he said one day, looking around the bustling office. "I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," I admitted, and it felt good to say it out loud. Do you know what it feels like to finally do something for yourself after years of sacrifice? Have you ever discovered a talent you didn't know you had because you were too busy supporting someone else's dreams? One year after the divorce, I was at the office late, reviewing expansion plans, when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mrs. Davis? This is Jennifer Chin from the New York State Department of Health." My heart jumped. Had something gone wrong with one of our clients? Had we violated some regulation I didn't know about? "Yes, this is Martha Davis. I'm calling because we've been reviewing home care providers in the New York City area, and your company has received exceptional feedback. We'd like to feature Davis Home Care Services in our next newsletter as a model for quality care." I had to sit down. "You want to feature us? Your client satisfaction scores are the highest we've seen. Your staff retention is remarkable. And your innovative approach to personalized care is exactly what we want to encourage in this industry." After I hung up, I sat in my office and cried. Not sad tears, happy ones. Proud ones. Tears for the woman I'd been, who'd thought her worth was tied to being someone's wife. And tears for the woman I'd become, who'd built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. The feature in the state newsletter brought even more attention. A local news station did a story on home care businesses owned by women of color. I was invited to speak at a nursing conference about starting your own practice. At that conference, I met dozens of women with stories similar to mine. Nurses who'd supported their husbands through medical school, law school, business ventures. Women who'd put their own dreams on hold. Women who were now, finally, choosing themselves. "You're an inspiration," one woman told me after my talk. She was maybe 50, with tears in her eyes. "My husband left me last year for someone younger. I thought my life was over. But hearing your story, maybe it's just beginning." "It absolutely is," I told her. "The best chapters are often the ones we write for ourselves." Meanwhile, I heard occasional updates about Nigel through mutual acquaintances. His medical practice had downsized. He'd had to let go of staff and move to a smaller office. The hospital investigation had resulted in mandatory ethics training and a formal reprimand on his record. Nicole had apparently gotten engaged to that Wall Street guy and moved to Connecticut. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but I felt no pity either. He'd made his choices, and now he lived with them, just like we all do. David had maintained minimal contact with his father, brief phone calls on holidays, nothing more. It hurt my son, I could see that, but I also saw him growing stronger, more independent, more certain of his own values. "I used to think Dad was this brilliant, successful man," David told me one evening over dinner. "Now I realize he was just good at performing success while you were the one actually holding everything together." "Your father has his good qualities," I said, because I wanted David to find his own peace with it. But yes, I did hold a lot together. And I'm glad I finally learned to hold myself together too. 2 years after the divorce, Davis Home Care Services had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We had 150 clients across 3 boroughs, 45 employees, and we just signed a contract with a major insurance company to be their preferred provider. I'd moved out of the Harlem brownstone, too many memories, and bought a beautiful condo in Brooklyn with a view of the water. The brownstone I'd kept as a rental property, managed by a company, providing steady, passive income. My savings account, once secret and small, now reflected a thriving business and smart investments. I was financially independent in a way I'd never been, Even during my marriage. I started dating occasionally, nothing serious, just enjoying male company without the pressure of building a life with someone. One man, Robert, was a retired teacher who loved jazz and made me laugh. We'd go to concerts, have long dinners, enjoy each other's company without any expectations beyond the present moment. "You know what I love about you, Martha?" Robert said one evening. "You know exactly who you are."
So,
Many people our age are still trying to figure it out. I had to lose everything to find myself, I admitted. It's not a path I'd recommend, but I'm grateful for where it led me. Have you ever noticed how the worst moments of your life can sometimes lead to the best chapters?
how?
Sometimes losing everything is actually the beginning of gaining yourself. One afternoon, I was at the office when Sharon, my HR friend, not Mrs. Patterson's daughter, called with interesting news. "Martha, you're not going to believe this. Nigel came in today to submit his resignation. He's leaving Mount Sinai." I was genuinely surprised. His practice is failing. He can't afford to keep it running. He's taking a position at a small clinic in New Jersey, basically starting over. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Not satisfaction, not quite pity, just a kind of sad acceptance that this was his journey now,
Separate from mine.
How did he seem? I asked. Honestly, humbled. It's like the last 2 years broke something in him. He asked about you, actually. Asked if I'd heard how you were doing. What did you tell him? I told him you're thriving, that you're building an empire and helping people. He just nodded and said, "That's good. She deserves it." After we hung up, I thought about that for a long time. Nigel's validation meant nothing to me anymore. I didn't need it, didn't want it. But maybe it meant he'd finally learned something from all this. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore, and that was the real freedom. What do you think? Do you need your ex to acknowledge what they did wrong? Or is the best revenge really just living well and moving forward? The third anniversary of my divorce fell on a Saturday. David threw me a celebration of independence party at my condo, inviting my employees, my friends, Diane, even some of my clients' family members who'd become friends over the years. Mrs. Patterson, now 85 and still fierce, raised her glass of sparkling cider. To Martha, who taught us all that it's never too late to start over and build something beautiful. Everyone cheered, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd found myself. My strength, my purpose. As the party wound down, and I stood on my balcony looking at the Brooklyn lights reflecting off the water, David came to stand beside me. "You happy, Mom?" he asked. "I really am," I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely, completely happy. "Good," he said, putting his arm around me. "You deserve it. And you know what? I finally believed that. I deserved happiness, success, peace, all of it. Not because of what I'd survived, but because of who I'd become." The woman who walked out of that restaurant 3 years ago thought she was losing everything. She didn't realize she was about to gain the whole world, her world, built on her terms, filled with purpose and pride. Have you ever looked back at a painful moment and realized it was actually the beginning of your best life? That's what I learned. Sometimes the end is just the beginning in disguise. 5 years after the divorce, Davis Home Care Services had become something I never could have imagined. We'd expanded to all 5 boroughs of New York City, employed over 200 care professionals, and had just been approached by investors interested in helping us expand to other cities. I was sitting in my office, a real corner office now, in a building I owned in downtown Brooklyn, reviewing the investor proposal when my assistant Keisha knocked on the door. "Mrs. Davis, you have a visitor. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "It's Dr. Davis, your ex-husband." I hadn't seen Nigel in person for 3 years, not since the day the divorce was finalized. I'd heard updates. Occasionally, he was working at that clinic in New Jersey, living modestly, apparently had done a lot of therapy and soul-searching. Part of me wanted to say no, to send him away. But curiosity won. Send him in. Nigel looked different. Older, yes, but also softer somehow. The arrogance that used to define him was gone, replaced by something that looked like humility. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, nothing like the expensive designer clothes he used to favor. "Martha," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Nigel?" He sat down without being invited, but not in an entitled way, more like his legs couldn't hold him up anymore. "I wanted to apologize. A real apology, not the half-hearted ones I gave before." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Okay, I'm listening." "I destroyed the best thing in my life because of ego and stupidity," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I took you for granted for 25 years. I let you sacrifice your dreams so I could chase mine, and then I repaid you with betrayal and humiliation. There's no excuse for what I did. None. I waited. There had to be more. I've been in therapy for 2 years," he continued, "trying to understand why I did what I did. My therapist says I was terrified of growing old, of not mattering, of losing relevance. So I tried to recapture you through Nicole, through dramatic gestures, through this fantasy life I'd built in my head. And I prompted. And I lost everything real in the process. I lost you. I lost David's respect. I lost my reputation, my practice, my home. Everything." He looked up at me, and I saw genuine pain in his eyes. "I deserved all of it." "Yes, you did." I agreed, and I saw him flinch. "I know I can never make it right. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to try to win you back. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I had, what I threw away. And I wanted you to know that seeing you succeed, seeing you build this incredible company, seeing you thrive, it makes me happy. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." I sat with his words for a moment. 5 years ago, this apology might have meant something. Now, it was just words from a man I used to know. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally replied. "And I hope you've found some peace with yourself." "I'm working on it," he said. "I'm not the man I used to be. I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late for us." "It is too late for us," I confirmed. "But it's not too late for you to be a better person going forward." "Have you reached out to David?" His face fell. "He won't see me. He responds to texts sometimes, but he won't meet me in person." I don't blame him. "Keep trying," I said, surprising myself. "He's your son. He might not be ready now, but someday he might be. Don't give up on him." Nigel nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Martha, for everything you did for me, even when I didn't deserve it. And thank you for seeing me today." After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing the encounter. I didn't feel angry or sad or vindicated. I felt nothing. And that was perfect. He was just a man I used to know, no longer important enough to hold space in my heart. Would you have seen your ex after all that time? Would his apology have meant anything to you? Or would you have felt the same emptiness I felt? That evening, I met Robert at our favorite jazz club in the village. We'd been seeing each other for 3 years. Now, still not living together, still maintaining our independence, but definitely more than casual. Nigel came to see me today. I told him over drinks. Robert raised his eyebrows. That must have been interesting. What did he want? To apologize, apparently. He's in therapy, working on himself, all that. How did you feel about it? I thought about it. Nothing. I felt nothing. He's just someone from my past now. Robert smiled and took my hand. That's when you know you've truly healed. When they become just another person, not the person who hurt you. He was right. Nigel no longer had any power over my emotions, my decisions, my life. I'd taken all that power back and used it to build something beautiful. The following week, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference in Chicago. 2,000 women gathered to hear stories of entrepreneurship, resilience, and success. When I took the stage, I looked out at all those faces: Black women, white women, Latinas, Asian women. Women of all ages and backgrounds, and I saw my own story reflected back at me. Women who'd sacrificed, who'd been betrayed, who'd been underestimated, but who'd chosen to rise anyway. My name is Martha Davis. I began. And 5 years ago, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. I told my story, not just the betrayal and the divorce, but the rebuilding. The fear of starting over at 45. The doubt about whether I could succeed. The moments when I wanted to give up. And ultimately, the triumph of discovering who I really was beneath all those years of being someone's wife. The worst thing that ever happened to me, I concluded, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to
me.
Not because I'm glad he left. I would have preferred he'd been a better person. But because it forced me to become who I was always meant to be. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of women came up to me, sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking me for giving them hope. One woman, probably in her 60s, with silver hair and tired eyes, gripped my hand tightly. I've been married for 40 years to a man who makes me feel invisible. I'm too old to start over, aren't I?
I squeezed her hand back.
Honey, you're not too old. You're just ready. And that's the perfect age. She started crying, and I hugged her while she sobbed. How many women were trapped in marriages because they believed the lie that they were too old, too uneducated, too dependent to start over? That night in my hotel room, I made a decision. Davis Home Care Services was successful, but I had more to
give.
More women to reach. More stories to tell. I started writing a book about my journey, not just the dramatic parts, but the practical parts. How to secretly save money. How to document financial abuse. How to find a good lawyer. How to start a business with limited capital. How to rebuild your credit and your confidence. From nurse to entrepreneur, one woman's journey from betrayal to business success was published 8 months later. It became a bestseller within weeks, particularly among Black women and women over 40 who saw themselves in my story. I went on a book tour, speaking in churches, community centers, and women's shelters across the country. Everywhere I went, women told me I'd given them hope, given them a roadmap, given them permission to choose themselves. The book's success led to more opportunities. A podcast about women rebuilding their lives. A consulting service helping women start their own businesses. Speaking engagements at universities and corporate events. David, now 30 and thriving in his own marketing career, sometimes came to my events. Watching him watch me speak, the pride on his face, made everything worth it. You know what's wild, Mom? He said after one particularly powerful talk. If Dad hadn't been such a fool, none of this would exist. You wouldn't have built the company, written the book, helped all these women. His worst decision led to your best life. He was right. And that was the ultimate irony. Nigel's betrayal had freed me to become more than I ever could have been as his wife. 7 years after the divorce, I was invited to the White House for a small business award. Me, Martha Davis, girl from a working-class family in Brooklyn, standing in the White House receiving recognition for creating jobs and serving the community. Diane flew to D.C. for the ceremony, tears streaming down her face as I accepted the award. Your grandmother would be so proud, she whispered afterward. That night, back in my hotel, I video called David. He'd wanted to come, but had an unmovable work commitment. Mom, you're literally an award-winning entrepreneur now, he laughed. How does it feel? Surreal, I admitted. 10 years ago, I was just trying to survive Nigel's betrayal. Now look where we are. You know what I never told you? David said, his face getting serious. That day at the restaurant when Dad made his announcement, I looked at you, and I was terrified. Terrified you'd fall apart. Terrified our whole world was ending. But I didn't fall apart, I said softly. No, you didn't. You stood up, you handled it with grace, and then you built an empire. You taught me more about strength in that moment than Dad ever taught me in 25 years. After we hung up, I thought about the woman I'd been at that restaurant. She'd been scared, hurt, humiliated. But she'd also been ready, even if she didn't fully know it yet. Ready to stop living for someone else and start living for herself. What would you tell your younger self if you could go back? Would you warn them about the pain ahead? Or would you let them walk through it knowing what's waiting on the other side? By the 10-year anniversary of my divorce, Davis Home Care Services had expanded to 6 cities, employed over 800 people, and served thousands of clients. The company I'd started with $50,000 from my settlement was now valued at $15 million. But the money wasn't what mattered most. It was the lives we'd changed, not just our clients, but our employees. I'd made it a priority to hire women getting back into the workforce after divorces, women who'd been out of nursing for years raising children, women who needed second chances. My office had a wall dedicated to thank you cards and letters. One, from a nurse named Teresa, hung in a frame. You gave me a job when no one else would. You gave me a chance to rebuild my life after my husband left. You showed me I could be strong again. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. That card reminded me every day why I did what I did. I'd also started a foundation, the Second Chances Foundation, that provided microloans and business training to women starting over after divorce or widowhood. We'd helped 500 women start businesses in 3 years. Everything from catering companies to consulting firms to cleaning services. One of those women was Nicole. Yes, that Nicole. Dr. Nicole Chun, Nigel's former mistress. She'd reached out 2 years ago, her voice shaky on the phone. Mrs. Davis, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm desperate. Her Wall Street fiancé had dumped her when she got pregnant. She'd left medicine after the hospital scandal, struggled to find work, and was now a single mother trying to start a virtual medical consulting business with no capital and terrible credit. My first instinct was to hang up, but then I thought about the woman I'd become, about the grace I'd learned, about second chances. Tell me about your business plan, I'd said. We'd given her a loan and business training. She'd worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen, driven by desperation and maybe guilt. Her business was now thriving, and she'd paid back every penny of the loan early. She sent me a card last Christmas. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that watching you build your life after what we did to you changed me. You showed me what real strength looks like. Thank you for the chance to start over. I didn't frame that card, but I kept it, not because I'd forgiven her completely, but because it reminded me that people could change, could grow, could become better than their worst moments. Would you have helped the woman who helped destroy your marriage? Or would that have been a bridge too far? On the actual 10-year anniversary of the divorce, I threw a massive party, not to celebrate the end of my marriage, but to celebrate the beginning of my real life. I rented out a rooftop venue in Manhattan, invited everyone who'd been part of my journey, my employees, my clients' families, my friends, Diane, David, and his girlfriend, Robert, even some of the women I'd mentored through the foundation. As the sun set over the city, and I looked around at all these people whose lives had intersected with mine, I felt overwhelmingly grateful. Not for the betrayal, that still hurt when I let myself think about it, but for the strength I'd discovered, the life I'd built, the woman I'd become. David clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. I want to say something about my mom, he announced. And everyone got quiet. 10 years ago, my father made the worst decision of his life. He humiliated my mom in public, thinking she'd crumble. Instead, she stood up, walked out, and proceeded to build an empire. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She didn't just rebuild her life, she transformed it. Mom, you're my hero. You've shown thousands of women that it's never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to build something beautiful from the ashes. I love you. I was crying by the time he finished, and so was half the room. Diane raised her glass. To Martha Davis, who taught us all that the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a better one. To Martha, everyone cheered, and in that moment, I felt completely, utterly whole. Later that night, after most guests had left, Robert and I stood at the edge of the rooftop looking at the Manhattan skyline. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. I regret that Nigel wasn't the man I thought he was. I regret that David had to watch his father fail him. But do I regret how my life turned out? Not for a second. What would you tell the Martha from 10 years ago, if you could? I smiled. I'd tell her that the pain is temporary but the power is permanent. I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows. I'd tell her that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so full of purpose and joy that you forget to be angry. And I'd tell her that she's not losing everything. She's about to gain herself. Robert kissed my forehead. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm just a woman who refused to let someone else's betrayal define her story. As I drove home that night to my beautiful condo overlooking the water, I thought about the envelope I'd handed Nigel at that restaurant 10 years ago. It had contained divorce papers and evidence of his deception. But really, it had contained something more, my declaration of independence, my refusal to be a victim, my decision to fight for myself. That envelope had been my ticket to freedom, and I'd used it to build something extraordinary. I never saw Nigel again after that day in my office 5 years ago. I heard he eventually reconciled somewhat. With David, they had lunch occasionally, maintained a cordial relationship. He remarried a woman his own age, kept working at that clinic in New Jersey, apparently had finally found some peace. Good for him. Really. His journey was no longer my concern. My journey led here, to a life filled with purpose, success, love, friendship, and most importantly, authenticity. I was no longer living for someone else's approval or dreams. I was living for me, and it felt absolutely incredible. So here's what I learned, what I want every woman out there to know. Betrayal can break you, or it can break you open. It can destroy you, or it can destroy only who you used to be, making room for who you're meant to become. When Nigel announced he was leaving me in that restaurant, I thought he was taking everything. Instead, he was giving me the greatest gift, the gift of necessity. The necessity to save myself. The necessity to discover my own strength. The necessity to build my own life on my own terms. 10 years later, I'm 55 years old with a white streak in my black curls, a thriving business empire, a best-selling book, a foundation that's helped hundreds of women, and a sense of self I never had when I was too busy being Mrs. Nigel Davis. The woman I am now wouldn't trade places with the woman I was then for anything in the world. And that, more than any revenge I could have plotted, is the truest victory of all. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt like your world was ending, if you've ever wondered if you could survive starting over, I want you to know that you can. Not only can you survive, you can thrive. You can build something more beautiful than you ever imagined. Your ending might just be your beginning in disguise. Don't be afraid to walk through that door when it opens. The best version of yourself might be waiting on the other side.
Trust me.
I know.